Thank you for taking the time to be here this evening for the third lesson in our Elijah and Elisha series. John has pointed out that he read all through the notes and didn't find anything about Elisha. And I told him that good things come to those who wait. And sooner or later, it might be later, we will get to Elisha. I'm not sure. My guess is that we would probably have 3 more on Elijah after tonight. That's my guess. Don't hold me to that. But thank you for being here for this study. So what have we learned so far? I'm not going to spend much time reviewing, but we have to have a good mental picture of what's going on. Elijah obeys God. Paul is trying to tell me something that is not worth sharing with you. So. Just kidding. The northern kingdom is the focus of our story. The northern kingdom thus named because they broke off from Judah and Benjamin and became Israel after the death of Solomon. And if you could have lived back in that day, you would have wondered, is this really the people of God? There is so little of Yahweh, is what I call him. If you're new to the class, just get used to it. It'll be all right. There's so little of Yahweh going on in the country because Baal, or Baal, as he really should be known, but I can't do that. Baal predominates religious life. And that life is promoted by Ahab and good queen Jezebel, who beginning next week will play a prominent role in the story. But she's kind of been pushed to the background so far. But she doesn't like to be in the background, and she won't be starting next week. Meanwhile, in chapter 17 and verse 1, without any kind of background, Elijah shows up in the presence of Ahab and announces, no rain. Not till I say so. You're not going to get a drop of rain until I say so. And then he flees east of the Jordan and gets fed by ravens and drinks from the brook Cherith or Cherith, whichever pronunciation you like. And I don't know how long he stayed there, but he stayed there until the ravine dried up. Why would a ravine dry up? It's a drought, people. It hasn't rained. And the water from that brook comes from the mountain and flows into the Jordan, but it's not running anymore. And God says, I have something else in mind for you. And he sends him to Zarephath, which ironically is right near where Queen Jezebel is from, if she had only known. And there he meets a widow who is willing to care for him with her meager. You know, God performs this wonderful miracle so that there's always oil and there's always flour. But listen, it's still just oil and flour. Are you with me? I mean, if I said, hey, you're always going to have Crisco and Gold Bond. Is it Gold Bond? Did I make that up? The flour. I don't know.
Gold medal.
Gold medal. Ah, Gold Bond. Oh, yeah, Gold Bond's a different thing. Never mind. You're always going to have Crisco and Gold medal flour. Well, it's nice to know, but not a lot of variety. But it gets them through this horrific drought. And then the drought, which lasts 3 years, probably maybe closer to 3.5 years, Elijah gets a message. Now I want you to go back to Ahab and tell him what? Had anybody read chapter 18? I'm just curious.
It's going to rain.
It's going to rain, yes. I brought Paula her Bible so she could read chapter 18 today. I strongly recommended that you do that too. Yes, the message is it's going to rain. Now, but first, we're introduced to a fellow named Obadiah. And the way he is described in 1 Kings chapter 18, he's almost like the chief of staff. Okay? He's basically in charge of Ahab's doings, his household, and maybe everything else. I don't know. Isn't there a book named Obadiah?
Amos, Obadiah.
Yeah, after Amos, Obadiah, and then Jonah. You're right.
Thank you.
So is this the Obadiah that wrote that book? I can give you a very strong perhaps. We don't know. And if you read somebody that says, yes, it is, he doesn't know. There are actually a number of Obadiahs mentioned in the Old Testament, 13 in all. Obadiah was to the 8th century BC what John was to the 20th century. Notice I didn't say 21st. Now it's Malcolm or, who knows. But apparently a lot of parents name their kids Obadiah. So we have no way of knowing if this is the same prophet who wrote the book of Obadiah. It's possible. But in this context, he is in charge of Ahab's household, and he is described as a true worshiper of Yahweh. Don't you wonder how that works? How can he be Ahab's chief of staff, the primary pusher of Baalism? And he's his chief of staff, but he's still a true worshiper of the Lord. I don't know. I'll bet it was sticky sometimes. But one of the things that the author points out that Obadiah was able to accomplish, he provided for 100 of the prophets of Yahweh by hiding them in 2 caves, 50 to a cave. You know, those are pretty big caves. 50 to a cave, and he provided them with what they needed to eat and drink and take care of themselves. Apparently, all without Ahab knowing what is going on. So he is not only chief of staff, he is sneaky of staff as well. He is able to get that done, okay? So we are introduced to Obadiah because he's going to play a part in the story a little bit. It's a very small part in the story, but it's, now, it's in verse 4, I think. I told you I was going to mention a few. Yes, while Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hid them in a cave, in 2 caves. Now, I'm going to speculate. I do that every once in a while, hold my feet to the fire if I do something bad. I'm going to suggest to you that when Baalism was first introduced into society, that it was given to the people as an option. You can worship Baal or you can worship Yahweh, either one, take your choice, but over time, that changed. And one of the main reasons it changed was because a female was introduced into the royal house. Jezebel brought all of her prophets from up there near Sidon and brought them down. And now, rather than this being a choice, obviously the religion of Baalism is mandated by the government. To the point that if you are a prophet or maybe even a follower of Yahweh or devoted to Yahweh, your head was on the line. Jezebel spent her time trying to find all the prophets of Yahweh to put them to death. So things now have changed dramatically. It is a government-mandated worship of Baal that we find in Israel. So, by the way, Charles Spurgeon, anybody heard that name? Great preacher. Charles Spurgeon said, and I like this quote, so I'm sharing it. It is sad to find a Judas among the disciples, but it is great to find an Obadiah among the pagans. I mean, you go, again, I'm not sure how that works, but it did. And that's, okay, so the story takes a bit of a change when Ahab, I think beginning in verse 5, notices that the donkeys and the horses, which are very important to him, are getting a little thin. I think it's a little bit funny that there were probably human beings every day starving to death. But Ahab says, my horses are looking a little thin. We need to do something about that. And so Obadiah and the king work out a plan. Obadiah goes one way, the king goes the other way, and they are looking for any kind of small remaining pasture grass that might exist, somehow watered by springs or whatever. Both of them said, we've used up basically everything. Maybe there's one we haven't found yet. One goes north and one goes south, probably, or east and west, I'm not sure. But they went in different directions looking for grass for the animals, even though the people were starving to death. Now, it was during that time that Obadiah ran into Elijah. And where is Elijah going? He's going to see the king, to tell him that it's going to rain. Now notice in verses 7 and 8, as Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground and said, "Is it really you, my lord, Elijah?" "Yes," he replied. "Go tell your master, Elijah is here." Obadiah didn't think that was a very good idea. Obadiah was very fearful for the king's response. And notice what it says about the king's work in verse 10. "As surely as the Lord God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you." Think about that. There's not a kingdom around that hasn't had somebody looking for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me to go to my master and say, "Oh, Elijah's here." And I think what he's afraid of is he'll go in and tell the king Elijah is coming, and then Elijah doesn't come. What's going to happen to the chief of staff? He's going to be replaced. Yeah, he's going to be replaced because he promised something that he could not deliver. And I love what the prophet says in verse 10. Listen, if I can find it. "As surely as the Lord your God lives," I have to find it now. Yeah. Come on.
Right after 9.
No, yeah, but it's not 10.
It is 10.
Thank you. Hey, hang on a minute. Yeah, it's 15. Now, Paula, you've got to get your verses straight when you make these notes. "As surely as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve." Paula, what should that be?
I stand in the presence of.
Whose presence I stand in? That's what the text says. The NIV decided, let's just put in "whom I serve." And by the way, again, why is that important? Because he is on his way to stand in the presence of the king, but he wants everyone to know that his primary standing is in the presence of the Lord Almighty. He says, "I will surely present myself to Ahab today." Obadiah, don't worry. I'm not going to go off somewhere for a week and throw you under the bus. I am coming today, as surely as the Lord lives. And during that conversation, by the way, Obadiah, and I think I would have done the same. Obadiah, when he's afraid he's going to die, said, "By the way, Elijah, you should know that I've saved 100 prophets by putting them in caves and feeding them and taking care of. I shouldn't have to die, right?" I don't know that he's bragging. He's just pointing out how important he is to Yahweh and to the worship of Yahweh. So I shouldn't have to die. So don't make me go tell the king. Verse 17. "When Ahab saw Elijah, he said to him, 'Is that you, You troubler of Israel? I read that and I think, wow. And I can almost hear Elijah say, me? You think it's me that's the trouble of Israel? You threw the law in the trash and tried to stomp out the worship of the one true God, and you think I'm the troubler? You are the troubler in Israel. You know, our fallen human nature finds it much easier to blame others for our shortcomings. Have you ever noticed that? That's why I married Paula. That's why it's always her fault. We're prone to do that. We find ourselves between a rock and a hard place, and accepting responsibility seems to be the least of our choices. Ahab says, Elijah, you're the reason why this nation is in bad shape. He does not seem to get it that the problem behind the drought is not Elijah. The problem is a spiritual one. The problem is that he no longer serves the one true God of heaven and earth, and he has let Jezebel run rampant, killing all the prophets of Yahweh. So, they come to the conclusion that there needs to be some way of determining if Baal is the true God or if Yahweh is the true God. How are we going to determine that? Well, Elijah challenges the king to bring people, as many people as he can think of, to Mount Carmel for a contest. All Israel, by the way, is urged to come. Now, that doesn't mean everybody in Israel. I hate to tell you that, because Mount Carmel couldn't hold it. But I believe there is a representative of maybe every family, every tribe, every clan, and I wouldn't be surprised if even the 2 tribes of the southern kingdom were represented at Mount Carmel. I want everybody here. I want them to see who is the true God in Israel. Oh, by the way, there were also going to be 850 people who would be opposing. Did you notice that? 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. Everybody remember who Asherah is? She's the stick. She's represented by a wooden stick. She is the goddess who is the consort of Baal, because he has to have somebody to practice fertility with. And they chose a stick. Makes sense to me. And by the way, I think it's in verse 19. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it is in verse 19. It says the 400 prophets of Asherah ate at Jezebel's table. That's a table. And you see the coverage of the visit that the president made to England when they had the royal dinner. Anybody see that on the news? Is that the biggest table you ever saw in your life? You could say, pass the mashed potatoes, and by the time it got there, you don't care about mashed potatoes anymore. I mean, that table was about 100 feet long. It was ridiculous. And don't try to imagine a table where 400 people are sitting. What does that phrase really mean? They were on Jezebel's payroll. They were sponsored. They were supported. They were loyal to Jezebel. 400 prophets. And probably all of them came from Phoenicia, because Jezebel brought the entourage with her. So you have 850 people who are opposed to Elijah. Now, I get the impression that the 400 prophets of Asherah are not included in this contest that's coming up, because it really only refers to the prophets of Baal, but they're probably there cheering the guys on. You know what I mean? So you have 450 or 850 to 1. The odds are not on Elijah's side, but guess who is? Yahweh is. Yahweh is. What follows is one of the most dramatic scenes in all of Scripture. And if you read chapter 18, maybe again, because you're familiar with the chapter, it is richly described. And it takes place on Mount Carmel, or Carmel. Anybody ever been there? 1, 2, buckle my shoe. 3, no 4 to shut the door. You guys have been there too.
Hasn't everybody?
Well, I've been to Broken Bow, Oklahoma.
Same thing.
They tell me, and I've seen a picture, that there is a statue of Elijah. You saw the statue? See the statue of Elijah? Now, I was surprised when I saw the picture. Because I guess I would have expected to see the statue of Elijah, you know, preaching or kneeling in prayer or something like that. But what's he doing? Do you remember? He has a sword in his hand because of what is coming. We can't rush ahead. But he is seen, and he's standing on somebody. They didn't say who it was, but I'm going to guess it may have been a prophet of Baal. I don't know. He's got his foot on somebody. And he's holding high a sword. So, Mount Carmel is on the west coast, so to speak. It's not far from the Mediterranean. If you go to the southern part of Lake Galilee, you don't have to remember this to go to heaven, but if you go to the southern part of Lake Galilee and shoot straight west, right before you get to the Mediterranean, there's Mount Carmel. And it's mentioned a couple of times in Scripture. One of my favorites is that when Samuel went to look for Saul, because he was going to read him the riot act, the people said, oh, Saul went to Mount Carmel to build a monument to himself. Well, who wouldn't? Saul has gone to Mount Carmel to build a monument to himself. There's a couple of other things at Mount Carmel, but I probably didn't have time to tell you about that, but I did. So, let's see. The most important thing for you to know about Mount Carmel is that for hundreds of years before this contest, Mount Carmel had been the home of pagan worship and sacrifice. Sometimes even human sacrifice. And I found it a little strange that that's where Elijah chose to have this contest. I thought, he might say, hey, let's everybody come down to Jerusalem. We need to get as close to the temple of the Lord as possible. No. Let's go to Mount Carmel. And I make the point in your notes, if you read this, that God is willing to take the battle into enemy territory. And so should we. God is willing to take the battle against paganism into enemy territory, and I think that's a pretty good example for us. Now, it probably doesn't surprise you that I've gone to church all my life. And I love going to church. We have a wonderful church home, and we go nearly every Sunday, unless Paula says, I don't want, no, and I was reminded of Psalm 122 and verse 1. Some of you may know that. Either I was glad or I rejoiced with those who said, let us go up to the house of the Lord. The psalmist is basically saying there's nothing quite like a trip to the temple in Jerusalem. Oh man, we travel and we sing and we have a great time because there's nothing like being there. But for us, I hope, church is the place where we are equipped and where we are emboldened to be willing to share the word of the living God in enemy territory. And by that, I don't mean in Russia. I mean outside the confines of what we might expect to be an accepting group of people. You can say anything you want, basically, about the Lord and how good it is at church, but try it outside. So God says, we're going to do this on Mount Carmel. And Elijah says, I love it. I can hardly wait. So they assembled the people on Mount Carmel. And Elijah announced to the people that it was time they made a decision on whose they were. Who do you belong to is the important question. Notice verse 21, for you especially who didn't read. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. Notice the response of the people. Do you see it?
Nothing.
Nothing. The silence was deafening. The people said nothing. The author doesn't say why, but maybe they were afraid to say something. But Elijah makes it clear. You just have to decide. And by the way, some of the older translations, how many of you have this? How long will you go limping between the two sides? You got limping? That's not a bad translation. The NIV always tries to clean it up a little by using the word waver, but actually the Hebrew word suggests some kind of unusual body movement, like the way I walk, that kind of thing. It could be a limp, it could be a hop, it could be dancing. I will tell you that is the same word that appears in verse 26 when it talks about how the priests of Baal danced around their altar. Same word. So if he's saying, how long will you dance with two partners, you need to decide. You need to find a permanent partner. And if you got any sense at all, that will be God. Because, as we noticed in lesson 1, some of you remember this, our God, and we don't like to think of this, is jealous. He's jealous. In the 10 Commandments, he says, you shall have no other gods before me. Why? Because I'm a jealous God, and I'm not going to put up with that. Well, he's been putting up with it for quite a while here in the northern kingdom. And so he's telling the people, you have got to make up your mind who's going to be your dance partner. And this contest, he says, hopefully is going to help you decide. And then, I have it on good authority, it's not in the text, but he said, let's get ready to, I was going to say that's where that originated, but I don't think it was, and probably I'd get in trouble with it anyway. So, first there's an altar that is built to Baal. And they put wood on the altar, and they cut up a bowl, and they put the pieces of meat on the altar. And then Elijah builds an altar, and he puts wood on the altar and meat on the altar. And then he announces, here's the contest. We are going to cry out to our God, or gods, if you're Baal. And whoever sends fire down to make the sacrifice burn, that's the God who's the true God. And he says to the prophets of Baal, essentially, how do you feel about that? And to their credit, they said, sure. And the reason why I say, is that smart? Don't you think that during the 3-year period they have been telling Baal how important it is to make it rain? And it's been dry as a bone. And Baal is the fertility deity. Not just because he makes babies, but because he makes everything grow. And the way he makes stuff grow is to bring rain on the land. Baal is often seen with a lightning bolt in his hand. He's the god of thunder and lightning. He brings rain. And for 3 years, I'm guessing, they're going, would you please make it rain? And there hadn't been any. But now they say, sure, we'll pray for fire. Let's see how that works. So, by the way, When it came time for Elisha to build his altar, he built it out of an ice maker. It says that the altar of Yahweh was in ruins. It had been so long since that altar to the one true God had been used that it was just laying there in ruins. Or maybe the prophets of Baal tore it down. I don't know. But it said that Elijah had to rebuild or fix the altar. And to do that, did anybody notice what he used to do that? Somebody. Extra credit. 12 stones. Thank you. Whoever said that. He found 12. You think he was actually going for 14 but only found 12? No. He was taking the nation back to its roots. The number 12 was so crucial. There were 12 tribes. And I think this was a way of saying it shouldn't be 10 and 2. That's not what God had in mind. This is the people of God, and they should be one. One nation under God, indivisible. Does that sound familiar? Some of you are going, that's in the text. No. But it's the principle. They're not supposed to be divided. They're one nation under the one true God, and they're not supposed to be divided. Anyway, so here's the deal. The prophets of Baal go first. And it says that they started praying to Baal in the morning until about lunchtime. And they danced around the altar. Try to envision 450 prophets. Now, I don't know if they took turns. All right, 20 guys up for a 2-minute tag team. I don't know. But they spent the whole morning crying out to Baal, and they got nothing. Now, I'm going to tell you why they got nothing. There's no Baal. Keep that under your hat. There is no Baal. Oh, there's an idea of Baal, and there's idols to Baal, but there is no one to answer. And that's why they get no response. And then about noon, and listen, my imagination, please accept this. I can almost see Elijah sitting in a lawn chair drinking tea. And that's when he starts to mock the prophets of Baal. And he uses, listen closely to this, Paula, sarcasm. This is the biblical rationale for using sarcasm. So next time I'll remind you of that. Because he starts saying things to them like, just a minute. But I wrote these down in here. Oh, yeah. He says, maybe if you yelled louder, it would help. Because it's possible that your God is deep in thought. Now, come on, that's funny. Wonder what I'm going to do next in the world. I don't have time to. Maybe he's deep in thought. Or maybe he's busy. Did you happen to look in your notes to see if there's anything in your footnote about busy? Busy could well be a euphemism for something else. Going to the bathroom. Maybe Baal is on the pot. And that's why he's not answering you. Or he could be traveling. Maybe Baal's off on vacation. Maybe he took a road trip to Maine. I hear people do that. Or maybe, worst of all, maybe he's napping. He could be asleep. Whatever it is he's doing, if you will yell louder, maybe that will wake him up. And you know what? It says they started yelling louder. They got really loud, and then they started doing something that we go, what? They started cutting themselves, using spears and swords until the blood flowed off their bodies. Why would you do that? I would guess to show that you're serious. I've never tried that when, I need to try to get through to God. No. But they, and probably this was a practice that they did from time to time. Anyway, they did all of that. And they got nothing. So then it was Elijah's turn. He put wood on the repaired altar. He put the pieces of the bull on it. And then he said, you know what? Let's make this interesting. He calls for large jars of water to be thrown onto the altar. And then he does it again. And it looks like water may be dripping off. And so he says, let's dig a trench around the altar. And the third time they threw water onto the altar, the water ran down and filled the trench that they had dug. And then he says, okay, God, it's time for you to show yourself. I want you to send fire down on this offering. And he says, there are certain things that are going to be accomplished, and these are important if you read it in the text. There are certain things that are going to be accomplished if you do what I know you're going to do and send fire down. Number one, you are going to demonstrate that you are the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but you didn't die back then, you're still around. That's one thing that will show. Number two, that I am your servant that you sent to straighten things out. They'll know that if you do this. And number three, everything that is happening here today is not my idea. It's what you have ordained should happen. And number four, and this one's important, it will show that you are intent on turning the hearts of the people back to you. It's not just God showing out. God wants to turn the hearts of his people back to him. Do you remember what the essence of the law is? And it's not even the Ten Commandments. Here's the essence of the law, if anybody ever asks you. I will be your God, and you will be my people. That's the essence of the covenant that God made with Israel. I'll be your God. You'll be my people. Our hearts will be joined. It will always be that way, and now it's not. But in bringing fire down, God, it will show them that you haven't forgotten. You haven't forgotten the kind of relationship that you want with this people. All of those things are there in the text. You can find them if you look. So, God answers the prayer of his prophet with an amazing display of power. I don't know what that looked like. But the fire came down from heaven. I don't know if it's all one big blast or if it's in fireballs or what it is. But it not only burned up the altar, it not only burned up the wood, it burned up the rocks that the altar was made out of, and all the fire in the trench was burned up too. You see, Elijah said, let's make it difficult. Let's make it where people can't say, well, it was lightning, Because everything that he had put up on that altar was completely burned up. And the people responded, thank you, people, for doing this. The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. We finally have it settled in our minds. The Lord is God. Now, all the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah were gathered in the Kishon Valley, and they were put to death. 850 of them put to death. That seems a little extreme. I don't know if they had a trial. No, they didn't. They were put to death. And that's where you get that statue on Mount Carmel. Elijah is known as the one who slayed the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah. So they would not be there to claim that it was all a big misunderstanding. They wouldn't be there to claim anything, as a matter of fact. So, Elijah turns his attention to Ahab, and he says, Ahab, get back to doing what you do. Eat and drink and be about your normal routine, because I hear the sound of heavy rain. That's one of my favorite lines in here. I hear the sound of heavy rain. Yesterday, day before yesterday, we heard the sound of heavy rain. I mean, we hear thunder, and then, man, I was out driving in that, by the way. Coming up 423, I almost had to pull over. I couldn't see the road. It was heavy rain. And Elijah says, now, I hear that sound. And everybody goes, funny, we don't hear it. In fact, there's not a cloud in this sky. It's as clear as it's ever been. It's clear as it has been for the last 3 years plus. There is no rain. But Elijah says, I tell you, I hear it. And what's amazing to me is he doesn't have Doppler radar. He doesn't have Pete Delkus telling us what time it's going to rain. He has Yahweh. And Yahweh said, your message to Ahab is, I'm going to bring rain on the land. Well, how is it going to come? Before that, this is me and my imagination. Ahab has been told to go and eat and drink and go about his business. Have you ever wondered what Ahab is thinking at this point? He has just seen what everybody saw. And their response was, the Lord is God, the Lord is God. We finally have proof of that. What is Ahab thinking? Well,
How is he going to break it to Jezebel?
yeah, if Jezebel finds out about this, I'm in trouble. And you know what? That's exactly what the next chapter is about. Jezebel does find out about it. I'm sure you read ahead and knew that, Paul. Surely he's thinking, I've got to give up on Baal. Did he? No. No. He didn't give up at all. And I'm trying to think of what excuses he might have had to make in his own mind. Well, that was probably just a parlor trick of some kind. Or maybe Baal had an off day. You know, gods have off days every once in a while. Or maybe Elijah's sacrifice was more flammable. What did he think? He just saw this incredible miracle of God, and still he does not decide to give up Baal and turn himself to Yahweh. Now listen, I know that there are people who will choose to deny God over all evidence. I'm reminded of something Jesus said during his ministry. When he was telling the story of the rich man and Lazarus, remember? Lazarus said, please send somebody to tell my brothers. And he said, well, they have Moses and the prophets. Look them. No, they don't. Listen, if someone comes back from the dead, then they'll believe. And Abraham says, if they won't believe Moses and the prophets, they won't believe even if someone comes back from the dead. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. Because he knows that there are people who are going to find a way to deny God regardless of the evidence to the contrary. Sadly, the unbelieving heart always finds some reason to justify unbelief. I have seen it many times during my years of ministry. And probably you have too. So there's no rain yet. And Elijah, I love this part. Elijah goes, he climbs higher up on the very top of the mountain. And he goes there with his servant, the guy who carries his luggage, whoever it is, I don't know. And he begins to pray. And it says, he puts his head between his knees, and if I did that, I don't think I'd ever be able to get up. But anyway, and he begins to pray. And he's praying that God will follow through on his promise and make it rain. And after praying for I don't know how long, he says to his servant, go look to the west and see if it's getting cloudy. And the servant comes back and says, nope. So pray some more. Now go check. Nope. How many times?
7.
7 times? Why? Let me tell you. I don't know. I have no idea. I do know that sometimes for his own reasons, God wants his people to be persistent when they pray. Everybody knows what it means, persistent, right? That's like when Paula wants to order something from Amazon. She keeps... Jesus taught that when he was here. He told his disciples about the widow who needed help from the judge. And she would go plead her case to the judge, and he would just blow her off day after day. Go home, I'm not interested. But she kept coming back. And the judge says, I don't fear any man, but this woman is about to drive me crazy. And he grants her wish. And that comes in the 18th chapter of the book of Luke, which is introduced by these words. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. And again, I don't know why, but I do know that it's a biblical teaching. And back in the story, after the 7th time, and I know the servant's getting tired of walking up further and looking out over the Mediterranean, but he comes back after the 7th time, and Elijah says, did you see anything? And he said, well, there's a cloud out there about that big. And he says, run and tell Ahab he better get to Jezreel because the storm is a-coming. No Doppler radar. One little cloud about the size of a man's fist is all there is. But go tell Ahab he better get in his chariot and get to Jezreel because it is really coming down. And there are no windshield wipers on a chariot. You know that, right? Hard to see. And Ahab does exactly what the guy says. He jumps in his chariot and heads out for Jezreel. And I get the impression that the rain starts while he's driving back to Jezreel. Some would say, no, he got to Jezreel before it stopped. But that's not how I read. But the great thing is that the Spirit of the living God came upon Elijah. And he ran in front of the chariot all the way to Jezreel. It's about 12 to 14 miles to Jezreel from Mount Carmel. It's not easy to hang with a chariot unless you have the Spirit of God. And I thought about that. I know you're not going to believe this, but I used to run 10Ks all the time. I could have used that Spirit sometimes because I would get exhausted. But he didn't. Because that same living God who had brought fire down and destroyed everything on that altar was on Elijah. And it would stay on Elijah for many years to come. Anyway, That's all I've got to say about that. And you know, I'm sure you've read ahead, that Ahab has to tell Jezebel about what happened. And Mama ain't happy. Okay? And we'll read and study about that next time. And guess what? Elijah has to take off again. He has to flee. And we're going to find out what happens when he flees. And that's somebody's timer saying, if Dawn isn't finished by now,